Why Q never appeared in a Star Trek TNG movie. John de Lancey's Q popped up in every season of Star Trek The Next Generation to annoy Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, but he never appeared in any of the TNG films. Introduced in the feature-length premiere of TNG, Q became one of the show's most beloved recurring characters. Although Q initially took on an antagonistic role, he eventually became more of a nuisance for Captain Picard and his USS Enterprise D crew. John de Lancey and Patrick Stewart played magnificently off of one another, making all of their scenes incredibly fun to watch. After Star Trek The Next Generation came to a close with its 7th season, Captain Picard and his crew jumped to the big screen. The 4 TNG films not only passed the metaphorical baton from Captain James T. Kirk William Shatner to Captain Picard, but they also incorporated several elements that had been introduced on the show. Star Trek First Contact, for example, focused on the Borg and explored the after-effects of Picard's assimilation into Lactus. Each TNG film had a main villain, but John de Lancey's Q never made an appearance, despite his popularity among fans. While no one involved in the Star Trek films has provided a direct answer as to why Q never made an appearance, there are numerous possibilities. While Star Trek The Next Generation often dealt with complex moral quandaries and characters who fell somewhere between good and evil, the TNG films had clear good guys and bad guys. By the end of TNG, Q had developed a certain fondness for Picard, and even helped him out on a couple of occasions. Perhaps the minds behind the TNG movies wanted to have clear villains, and Q did not quite fit into that dynamic. The Star Trek films are also meant to appeal to a wider audience, and hopefully attract new fans to the franchise. By focusing more on sci-fi action and battles of good versus evil, the Star Trek films can be enjoyed without having seen every episode of the series. It would have been difficult to incorporate Q into a Trek film without explaining who and what he was, as well as his past dealings with Picard and the Enterprise D. While it would have been incredibly fun to see Q on the big screen, Star Trek The Next Generation did give Q a movie in its own way. Q may not have officially made the jump from television to film, but he did bookend Star Trek The Next Generation with significant roles in both the series premiere and finale. With its 3 interconnected stories and glimpse into the future, All Good Things felt like a feature film in many ways. The story follows Captain Picard as he jumps through the past, present, and future of the Enterprise D, as Picard works to investigate a strange spatial anomaly that threatens to destroy the universe. Q helps push Picard in the right direction. All Good Things is a perfect ending for TNG, and it feels like a better send-off for the characters than the final TNG film, Star Trek Nemesis. All Good Things works as well as it does because of everything that came before, making it a particularly rewarding episode for those who have been around since TNG began. Q fits perfectly into the story, and every Star Trek The Next Generation cast member gets a chance to shine. John de Lancey returned to play Q in Star Trek Picard Seasons 2 and 3, but it remains to be seen whether he will ever appear in a Star Trek feature film. In the rich universe of Star Trek, one character stands out for his omnipotence, mischief, and penchant for philosophical sparring, Q. Portrayed by John de Lancey, Q is an enigmatic figure whose interactions with Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, and the crew of the USS Enterprise were a major highlight of Star Trek The Next Generation, TNG. Yet despite Q's prominence in the television series, he was conspicuously absent from the 4 TNG films, Star Trek, Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis. Fans have long wondered why a character with such narrative weight and popularity never made the leap to the big screen. Several factors, ranging from narrative tone to creative decisions, help explain why Q remained confined to the television realm. 1. Tone and scope of the films. The TNG films, particularly First Contact and Nemesis, leaned heavily into action and drama. They explored grand, external conflicts with the Borg, the Romulans, and even time travel. Q, on the other hand, was a character often used for introspection and moral questioning. His episodes in TNG, Encounter at Farpoint, Q Who, Tapestry, and All Good Things, among others, frequently involve Picard and his crew reflecting on humanity's place in the universe, their choices, and their limitations. His interactions were cerebral, philosophical, and comedic at times, which didn't necessarily align with the darker, more action-driven tone the films were aiming for. While a Q story would have been entertaining, it may not have matched the cinematic style of the TNG films, which opted for high-stakes physical conflicts rather than metaphysical exploration. 2. Shift toward blockbuster appeal. When Star Trek moved to film, the franchise had to compete with other big-budget science fiction films of the era. The stakes were high to attract wider audiences, many of whom may not have been as familiar with the intricacies of TNG's 7 seasons. Consequently, the movies shifted toward more straightforward action-adventure stories that were easier to digest. Villains like the Borg Queen and Shinzin presented immediate, tangible threats, whereas Q's challenges were often abstract and intellectual. A Q-centered film would have required audiences to grapple with existential dilemmas and metaphysical puzzles, which may not have appealed to mainstream moviegoers expecting space battles and clear-cut antagonists. 3. Q's relationship with Picard. Q's primary foil was always Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, philosophical discourse, and the occasional exasperation from Picard at Q's antics. While this relationship was central to the TV series, it might have been difficult to translate into a full-length movie without diminishing the nuances of their dynamic. Q's power to manipulate reality and create virtually any scenario he desired would also complicate the structure of a 2-hour film. In many ways, Q is an anti-villain, more of a trickster god testing Picard than a traditional antagonist. The films, by necessity, needed more conventional foes with concrete goals that could be resolved within a limited runtime. 4. All Good Things served as a satisfying conclusion. The series finale of TNG, All Good Things, which prominently featured Q, is considered one of the best episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. In it, Q tests Picard by showing him different points in time and challenging his understanding of causality, life, and his responsibilities as a starship captain. The episode ends with Q implying that humanity's journey is far from over and that Picard is capable of much more than he realizes. For many fans, this episode served as a perfect capstone to the Picard-Q relationship. Bringing Q back in a feature film may have risked undermining the poignancy and finality of that last encounter. In essence, All Good Things gave fans the ultimate Q story, one that balanced the character's mischievousness with deep philosophical themes, and it would have been difficult to top that in a movie. 5. Creative decisions by the writing team. Another factor is the simple fact that Q may not have been a priority for the film's writers and producers. With only 4 TNG films made, there were a limited number of stories that could be told. The writers had to make tough decisions about which characters, themes, and conflicts to explore. Q's episodic nature, popping in and out of the series, may have worked perfectly on TV, but the films required more cohesive, continuous narratives. Moreover, each film had to stand alone to some extent, even for viewers unfamiliar with the series. Integrating Q, a character with deep lore and complicated motivations, may have been seen as too risky or convoluted for a broader audience. 6. Q works best in small dose. Part of Q's appeal lies in his unpredictability and infrequent appearances. Overusing him, particularly in the films, might have diluted the charm and impact of the character. His sporadic presence on TNG made his appearances feel like special events, where the crew and the audience would be forced to think outside of their usual routines. A feature-length Q story might have overextended the character's role, turning him from a mysterious, trickster-like figure